The morning light over Malibu comes in soft, the kind of gold that makes you believe the ocean goes on forever. Demetrio Thomas sat on his deck at 7 a.m., coffee going cold in his hand, watching the waves break against the rocks 40 feet below. He did this every morning now, had done it every morning for the 2 years since Kathleen died. The ritual kept her close somehow, as if the rhythm of the tide could fill the silence she'd left behind. The house felt too big without her. 4,200 square feet of memory and empty rooms. He'd been meaning to downsize, but the thought of packing up 30 years of their life together felt impossible. Besides, Scott had promised to bring the grandkids by more often. Maybe next month. Maybe summer. His phone buzzed against the glass table. Scott's name lit up the screen. Demetrio smiled. His son never called this early unless something was wrong or something was right. He hoped for right. "Hey, buddy," Demetrio said, pulling the phone to his ear. "You're up early." There was a pause on the other end, just long enough to make his chest tighten. "Dad." Scott's voice sounded thin, stretched. "I need to talk to you. Can Tiffany and I come by tonight? Around 6? "Of course. Everything okay?" Yeah, just some family stuff we need to discuss. Nothing bad." The way he said nothing bad made it sound like something bad. "Should I make dinner?" Demetrio asked. "I've got that salmon you like." "No, don't worry about it. We'll grab something after. We just need to talk. 6 o'clock? I'll be here." Scott hung up without saying goodbye. Demetrio set the phone down and looked back at the ocean. The unease sat in his stomach like a stone. In 42 years of being a father, he'd learned to read his son's voice. That wasn't the voice of a man bringing good news. But maybe he was wrong. Maybe Scott was finally ready to talk about taking over the family investment portfolio. Maybe they wanted to announce a pregnancy. Kathleen had always wanted to be a grandmother. He let himself hope. It was easier than the alternative. Scott's Mercedes pulled into the driveway at 6:15. Demetrio watched from the living room window as his son and daughter-in-law sat in the car for almost 2 full minutes talking. Scott's hands moved in short, agitated gestures. Tiffany touched his arm. Finally, they got out. Demetrio opened the door before they could knock. "Hey," he said, reaching for a hug. Scott gave him one of those quick, stiff embraces that last less than a second. Tiffany smiled, the tight, professional smile she used in her Instagram photos, and kissed the air near his cheek. Come in, Demetrio said, trying to ignore the coldness. "Can I get you something? Water? Wine?" "We're fine, Dad." Scott walked past him into the living room. He didn't sit. He stood near the fireplace, hands in his pockets, looking at everything except his father. Tiffany sat on the edge of the couch, her posture perfect, her designer purse clutched in her lap like a shield. Demetrio remained standing. The air in the room felt wrong. "So," he said carefully, "what did you want to talk about?" Scott exhaled hard through his nose. "Dad, there's no good way to say this, so I'm just going to say it. We're selling the house." The words didn't make sense at first. Demetrio's brain tried to rearrange them into something logical. "Selling what house?" "This house." Scott finally looked at him. His eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. "The Malibu house. We have a buyer. They're paying $9.5 million, all cash. The deal closes Friday, 4 days from now." Demetrio's coffee cup from this morning was still on the side table. He focused on it, the ring of brown residue at the bottom, the chip on the rim that Kathleen had always meant to throw away but never did. "I don't understand," he said quietly. "This is my home." Tiffany leaned forward. "Technically, Demetrio, the house is in Scott's name. You transferred the title 12 years ago for estate planning, remember? To avoid probate when Kathleen was sick." The memory came back in fragments. The lawyer's office, Kathleen pale and thin in the chair beside him, the stack of documents. "Sign here, Mr. Thomas. This protects your assets. Sign here." "But I live here," Demetrio said. The words sounded stupid even as he said them. "Dad," Scott's voice cracked, "we need the money. We're in trouble, bad trouble, the kind where if we don't get liquid fast, we lose everything." "Then let me help you. We can figure something out. There's nothing to figure out." Scott's jaw tightened. The buyer offered 9.5 cash 4-day close. "It's the fastest exit we're going to get. We've already accepted." "You accepted?" Demetrio looked at his son, really looked at him. The expensive suit that didn't fit quite right. The watch that cost more than a used car. The exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes. You accepted without telling me. I'm telling you now. 4 days before I have to leave, Tiffany stood up. We've arranged temporary accommodations for you. There's a nice extended stay place off the highway. We'll cover the first month. After that, we can help you find something more permanent, something smaller, more manageable. More manageable, Demetrio repeated. The rage was building now, hot and tight in his chest. You're putting me in a motel. It's not a motel, it's an extended stay. Get out, Scott flinched. Dad, get out of my house. Demetrio's voice didn't rise. That was the thing that surprised him, how steady it sounded, how cold. Both of you. Now. Tiffany grabbed her purse and headed for the door. Scott lingered, his hand reaching out as if to touch his father's shoulder, then dropping. I'm sorry, Scott whispered. I really am, but I don't have a choice. Everyone has a choice, son. You made yours. Scott left. Demetrio heard the Mercedes start, heard the gravel crunch under the tires as they pulled away. Then silence. Just the waves and the wind and the sound of his own breathing. He sat down on the couch. Kathleen's spot, the cushion still slightly compressed from years of her sitting there, and tried to understand how his life had just collapsed in under 10 minutes. 12 years earlier. The hospice nurse had said Kathleen might have 6 months, maybe a year if they were lucky. Demetrio had sat in the lawyer's office holding his wife's hand while the estate attorney explained how to protect their assets. If the house goes through probate, you're looking at 18 months of court proceedings, the lawyer had said. Transfer it to your son now, avoid estate taxes, keep it in the family. Demetrio had looked at Scott, 30 years old, finally getting his real estate license, trying so hard to make his father proud. You sure about this? Demetrio had asked him. Dad, I'm not going to sell your house. Scott had laughed at the absurdity of it. This is your home, Mom's home. I'm just holding it in trust, basically, for when you're ready to pass it down. Kathleen had squeezed Demetrio's hand. Do it, her eyes had said. Trust our son. So he'd signed, page after page after page. What he didn't remember, what he'd been too distracted to absorb, was the ground lease structure the lawyer had built into the arrangement. The split between land and improvements, the 10-year term. He'd been thinking about his dying wife, not about legal technicalities. The moving truck arrived Tuesday morning at 8 a.m. Demetrio had spent the night in a haze, calling Scott's number over and over until it went straight to voicemail. Blocked. His son had blocked him. He'd called his old attorney, Robert Walsh, who'd retired 5 years ago but still kept his bar license active. Walsh had come over at midnight, read through the title transfer documents, and delivered the news Demetrio already knew. Legally, Scott owned the house. Without proof of coercion or undue influence, there was no injunction available, not in 4 days. Pack your things, Walsh had said gently. I'm sorry, old friend. We'll figure out next steps after you're settled. Now, a man in a jumpsuit with a clipboard stood on the front porch, aggressive and impatient. Mr. Thomas, I'm Eddie, foreman with Apex Moving. We're contracted to clear the property by Thursday. If you're not packed, we can help with that, but there's an additional fee. This is a mistake, Demetrio said. My son. Sir, I have a work order signed by the property owner. If you refuse to vacate, I'm authorized to call law enforcement. Demetrio looked past Eddie to the street. A sheriff's deputy was parked at the curb waiting. They'd thought of everything. He packed what he could in 48 hours, clothes, documents, Kathleen's jewelry. The photo albums took up 2 entire suitcases. On Wednesday afternoon, Tiffany arrived to supervise. She wore yoga pants and sunglasses that cost more than his monthly property tax used to cost. She walked through the house with the cold efficiency of an estate appraiser, sorting his life into 3 categories: keep, sell, trash. Demetrio found her in Kathleen's study, holding a stack of gardening books, first editions, some of them, with Kathleen's handwriting in the margins, notes about soil pH and bloom times, and which roses grew best in coastal climates. These are pretty worn, Tiffany said. I don't think they have resale value. We'll trash them. Those were Kathleen's. I know, but she's gone, Demetrio, and nobody reads paper books anymore. She dropped them into a black garbage bag. Something inside him cracked. "Why are you doing this?" His voice came out raw. "I welcomed you into this family. I paid for your wedding when Scott's business was failing. I co-signed your first apartment lease. Why?" For the first time since she'd arrived, Tiffany looked at him, really looked at him. The Instagram mask slipped. He saw fear underneath, real, animal fear. "Because Scott is going to lose everything if we don't sell." Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "We owe people who don't send late notices, Demetrio. They send threats. I'm trying to save my husband's life. I'm sorry, you're just collateral damage." She walked away before he could respond. That evening, he found Kathleen's wedding photo in the hallway, the big one, the 5x7 in the silver frame they'd carried with them through 4 different houses. Tiffany had removed it from the wall. The frame sat on a side table. The photo was gone. He found it later in the garage in one of the black trash bags. The glass was cracked. Someone had stepped on it. He pulled it out carefully, shook off the coffee grounds and crumpled papers, and tucked it into his jacket. The Budget Inn off Highway 1 cost $69 a night. The room smelled like industrial cleaner and old cigarettes that had soaked into the walls over decades. The mattress sagged in the middle. The bathroom light flickered. Demetrio sat on the edge of the bed with one suitcase and Kathleen's photo. He'd wiped off the glass. She smiled up at him from 1982, 36 years old, laughing at something he'd said just before the shutter clicked. "I'm sorry, Katie," he whispered to the photo. "I couldn't protect it." His phone buzzed. Email notification, subject line, important family update. His hands shook as he opened it. "Dear family and friends, it's with a heavy heart that Tiffany and I need to share some difficult news about Dad. Over the past year, we've noticed his memory declining. He's been making erratic decisions, and after consulting with his doctors, we've determined he can no longer safely live alone. We've made the difficult decision to sell the Malibu house and use the proceeds to secure proper care for him. We're currently managing this transition, but as you can imagine, he's confused and upset. If he reaches out to you with stories about being evicted or claims we're stealing from him, please understand this is the confusion talking. We're doing this out of love, to keep him safe. We ask for your privacy and understanding during this difficult time. With love, Scott and Tiffany." The email was CC'd to everyone, his brother in Seattle, Kathleen's sister in Phoenix, his old business partners, the neighbors. They were erasing him, discrediting him before he could even defend himself. Demetrio stared at the screen until the words blurred. Then he saw it. In his suitcase, wedged between 2 photo albums, a manila folder he didn't remember packing. The label, in his own handwriting from 12 years ago, Malibu property, estate planning, 2012. He pulled it out with trembling hands, started reading, and everything changed. The document was dense, 43 pages of legal language that Demetrio's eyes had glazed over 12 years ago. Back then, he'd been sitting in a hospital waiting room while Kathleen underwent her 3rd round of chemotherapy. The estate attorney had needed signatures. Demetrio had signed. Now, at 1 a.m. in a Budget Inn that smelled like failure, he read every word. Page 17 made his heart stop. Ground lease agreement. This lease pertains to the land parcel, APN 4472-019-023, the property, located at 28,340 Pacific Coast Highway, Malibu, California. Lessor, Phoenix Real Estate Holdings, LLC, Demetrio Thomas, Managing Member. Lessee, Scott Michael Thomas. Term, 10 years from date of execution, commencing March 15, 2012, expiring March 15, 2022. Demetrio checked his phone. Today was March 12, 2024. The lease had expired 2 years ago. His hands shook as he flipped to the next page. Renewal. Lessee may renew this lease for an additional 10-year term by providing written notice to lessor no less than 30 days prior to expiration. Failure to provide notice shall result in automatic termination of lease rights. Reversion. Upon expiration without renewal, all improvements, structures, and fixtures located upon the property shall revert to lessor without compensation to lessee. Scott had never renewed. The lease had expired, and according to this document, when the lease expired, the house, every wall, every window, every nail, reverted to the landowner. to Phoenix Real Estate Holdings, to Demetrio. He read it 3 more times to make sure he wasn't hallucinating from exhaustion and grief, but the words didn't change. Scott didn't own the house anymore. Legally, he hadn't owned it for 2 years, which meant on Friday, when Scott signed papers transferring ownership to the buyers, he would be committing fraud, selling property he didn't possess. Demetrio's phone buzzed, a text from Scott. "Dad, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. The motel is paid through next week. We'll talk after we get back from Cabo." Cabo. They were going to Cabo with his money. Demetrio looked at Kathleen's photo on the nightstand. In the dim light, her smile looked sad. He picked up his phone and dialed Robert Walsh. Walsh answered on the 4th ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Demetrio, it's 1 a.m. What's wrong?" "I found something in the estate planning documents. Robert, I need you to look at something right now." 20 minutes later, Walsh called back. Demetrio could hear papers rustling in the background. "Holy shit," Walsh breathed. "Tell me I'm reading this right." "You're reading it right. Demetrio, this is extraordinary. When your attorney structured the estate transfer, he split the property into 2 components. The improvements, the physical house, went to Scott. But the land stayed with you under an LLC. Scott's been leasing the ground from you for $1 a year. And the lease expired 2 years ago, which means under California property law and the specific reversion clause in this contract, the house reverted to you. Scott's been living there as a, technically speaking, a squatter." Demetrio closed his eyes. "Can we stop the sale?" There was a long pause. "That's the complicated part. We could file an emergency motion, but here's the thing. Scott doesn't know about the expiration. This wasn't malicious. He inherited a property interest that lapsed without his knowledge. A judge might view this as a mutual mistake and allow him to cure by renewing retroactively. So I lose the house anyway. Possibly, unless..." Walsh trailed off. "Unless what?" "Unless we let the sale go through. If Scott sells the property on Friday, he's selling something he doesn't own. The buyers would have a fraudulent deed. They'd sue Scott to recover their $9.5 million, and since he'll have already spent at least some of it, he'd be liable for fraud. Criminal fraud, Demetrio. Your son could go to prison." The words hung in the stale motel air. "Robert, he's my son. He threw you out of your home. He blocked your number. He's telling everyone you're senile. If I do this, I destroy him. If you don't do this, you lose everything, the house, your dignity. And Scott learns that betrayal has no consequences." Walsh's voice softened. "I know this is impossible, but you need to decide what kind of man you want to be at the end of this. The father who sacrifices himself, or the father who teaches the hardest lesson?" Demetrio looked at Kathleen's photo again. She'd always been the soft one, the one who believed in second chances. But she wasn't here. And she wasn't here because he'd spent their final years building wealth to pass down to a son who'd just used it to erase him. "I need information before I decide anything," Demetrio said. "I need to know why. Why they needed this money so desperately." "I know someone who can help with that." Jessica Park arrived at the Budget Inn on Wednesday morning, carrying a leather portfolio and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd spent 20 years with the FBI. She was in her mid-40s, fit, with steel-gray streaks in her dark hair and eyes that missed nothing. "Mr. Walsh says you need a financial workup," she said, shaking Demetrio's hand. "Deep background on your son and daughter-in-law. I have to ask, are you sure you want to know? Sometimes the truth makes things harder." "I'm sure." "It'll cost you $3,000, 2 days of work." Demetrio pulled out his credit card. "How fast can you work?" "I'll have something by tomorrow night." Thursday evening, Jessica returned. She spread a stack of documents across the motel room's small table: bank statements, credit reports, business filings, social media archives. "Your son," she began, "is drowning. Has been for about 18 months. She walked him through it. Scott's real estate development company had over-leveraged on a condo conversion project in 2021, betting that the market would stay hot. It hadn't. When interest rates spiked, his financing dried up. He'd borrowed from hard money lenders at 18% to cover the gap. Then he'd tried to recoup losses through cryptocurrency speculation. He put $2.4 million into crypto between December 2021 and March 2022, Jessica said. Bought high, sold low, lost nearly all of it. Then he started borrowing against the Santa Monica penthouse he and Tiffany rent. How much does he owe? Total? $3.2 million. That's not loan sharks, Mr. Thomas. It's legitimate lenders, but the kind that foreclose fast. He's 6 months behind on the penthouse rent. That's $168,000 right there. If he doesn't pay by the end of this month, they're evicted. Demetrio's chest tightened. And Tiffany? Jessica flipped to another section. She's been running a lifestyle brand for 3 years. Tiffany Thomas Lifestyle, wellness, fashion, that whole influencer thing. She's about $800,000 in debt, credit cards mostly. She was buying followers, paying for engagement, leasing luxury cars for photo shoots. It all looks good on Instagram, but behind the scenes, it's a house of cards. So they're not evil, Demetrio said quietly. They're desperate. They made terrible choices, then made more terrible choices to cover the first ones. The $9.5 million from your house, $4 million goes straight to creditors. The rest probably disappears in 6 months the way they live. Demetrio stared at the papers. His son wasn't a villain. He was a failure. A proud, terrified failure who'd chosen to sacrifice his father rather than admit he'd screwed up. Somehow that made it worse. Friday morning, 24 hours before the sale closed, Jessica called with one more piece of information. Your son and daughter-in-law are having dinner tonight at Nobu Malibu, 8 p.m. reservation. They're celebrating with friends. Celebrating, Demetrio repeated. Want me to do anything with that information? He thought about it. What's the layout like? Could someone sit nearby without being noticed? The bar overlooks the main dining area. You'd blend in. Demetrio hadn't worn his Tom Ford suit in 5 years, not since Kathleen's funeral. It still fit, though the shoulders felt heavier than he remembered. He'd been the Barracuda once, back in the 90s, the real estate developer who could smell a distressed property from 3 counties away, the man who'd built a fortune turning other people's failures into profit. That man had retired when he married Kathleen. She'd wanted a gentler husband, a softer father, so he'd become one. Now, standing in front of the motel bathroom mirror, he looked like the Barracuda again. He arrived at Nobu at 7:45 and took a seat at the far end of the bar, ordered a whiskey he didn't drink, waited. Scott and Tiffany arrived at 8:10 with another couple, a guy in his 30s wearing too much cologne and a woman who couldn't stop checking her phone. They were loud, already tipsy from pre-dinner drinks somewhere else. Demetrio watched them settle into a booth near the window, watched Scott order a bottle of champagne, watched Tiffany laugh at something the cologne guy said. They looked happy. They looked relieved. The champagne arrived. Scott stood, raising his glass. To new beginnings, he said, and to getting out from under the fucking weight. They drank. Cologne guy leaned in. Dude, I still can't believe you actually did it. You kicked out your own dad. Demetrio's grip tightened on his glass. Scott's smile faltered. Don't say it like that. I mean, I get it. You needed the money, but that's cold, man. You don't understand. Scott set down his glass. His voice dropped, but Demetrio could still hear it. My dad, he'll be fine. He's tougher than he looks. He's got other resources. This money, it saves our lives. Tiffany and me. We were about to lose everything. Still, the woman said, it's your father. I know. Scott's face twisted. I fucking know. You think I feel good about this? I haven't slept in 3 days, but what choice did I have? Let them foreclose on us? Ruin Tiffany's credit? We're 42. We're supposed to have our whole lives figured out. This was the only way. Tiffany reached across the table and took his hand. Baby, you did what you had to do. Your dad would want you to survive. When things settle down, we'll make it right. We'll help him find a nice place. We'll what? We blocked his number, Tiff. We told everyone he's losing his mind. There's no making this right. Cologne guy shifted uncomfortably. Look, man, if you feel that guilty, maybe I don't want to talk about it anymore. Scott drained his champagne. We did what we had to do. End of story. But his hands were shaking. Demetrio left $40 on the bar and walked out. He sat in his rental car in the parking lot for 20 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel. Scott wasn't celebrating. He was justifying, rationalizing, drowning his guilt in expensive champagne and telling himself he'd had no choice. But he'd had a choice. He'd chosen not to ask for help. He'd chosen pride over humility. He'd chosen to save himself by throwing his father overboard. And now Demetrio had a choice. He pulled out his phone and called Walsh. "I heard him tonight," Demetrio said. "At dinner. Robert, he's not a monster. He's a scared kid who made a terrible mistake." "What do you want to do?" "I don't know. If I let this sale go through, if I enforce the reversion, Scott goes to prison. His life is over. But if I back down, if I renew the lease and walk away, he learns nothing. He'll think I'm weak. Demetrio," Walsh's voice was gentle, "there's one more thing you should know about the buyers." "What about them?" "I ran their names. It's not a development group. It's a family. Stephen and Linda Richardson. He's 53, she's 50. They sold their printing business in Denver, liquidated everything. This $9.5 million is their entire retirement. They chose your house because it's single level and wheelchair accessible." Demetrio's stomach dropped. Why do they need wheelchair accessible? "Their daughter, cerebral palsy, she's 28. They've been planning this move for 5 years. A place where she can live with them, where she can see the ocean. It's not an investment property, Demetrio. It's their dream." The world tilted. "If I let the lease expiration stand," Demetrio said slowly, "and the sale goes through, Scott commits fraud. The Richardsons lose their money. An innocent family gets destroyed because of my son's debt." "Yes. But if I renew the lease, the Richardsons get the house, Scott gets the money, and I lose everything." "Also yes. There has to be a third option." "There isn't. You save your son or you save yourself. You can't do both." Demetrio closed his eyes. Kathleen's voice echoed in his memory. "Be the kind of man who builds instead of destroys." "Robert," he said, "get me everything you can on the Richardsons. I want to know who I'm dealing with, and prepare paperwork for, I don't know yet. Just be ready. The closing is tomorrow at 2 p.m. "I know. I'll be there." Friday morning arrived with marine fog so thick Demetrio could barely see the highway from his motel window. He'd been awake all night, staring at the ceiling, trying to find a way out of the trap that didn't involve someone getting destroyed. At noon, Walsh called. "I'm outside. We need to talk before you do anything." They met in Walsh's Mercedes in the parking lot. "I did the research," Walsh said, handing over a file. "Stephen Richardson, 53, started his printing company at 25, built it from nothing, sold it last year for $12 million, paid taxes, paid off debts, left with 9.5. Linda Richardson, 50, special education teacher for 27 years. Their daughter Emma has cerebral palsy, moderate severity. She can walk with assistance but needs ground-level living." Demetrio flipped through photos. A smiling couple standing in front of a shuttered print shop, Emma in a wheelchair on a beach somewhere, laughing. "They're innocent," Walsh said, "completely. They hired a title company, did a standard search. The title company checked Scott's deed and declared it clean, because technically it is. The ground lease issue is buried in a separate LLC filing that nobody thought to cross-reference. So when Scott signs that deed tomorrow, the Richardsons think they're buying a legitimate property." "Correct. And when they wire $9.5 million, they think they're buying their dream. By the time anyone discovers the ground lease expired, Scott will have spent the money and the Richardsons will be holding a worthless deed." Demetrio looked at Emma's photo. She had her mother's smile. "I can't let that happen," he said. "Then you need to act. The closing is at 2 p.m. at Coastal Title on Pacific Coast Highway. If you're going to do something, you do it there." "What about Scott?" Walsh met his eyes. "What about him? He's my son. He stopped being your son when he threw you away." Demetrio put the file in his lap, looked out at the fog. "No," he said quietly. "He didn't stop being my son. That's the problem. If he'd stopped being my son, this would be easy." At 1:30, Demetrio put on his Tom Ford suit, pocketed the ground lease documents, and drove to the title company. The Barracuda was going to closing. The Coastal Title Company occupied a modest building wedged between a surf shop and a seafood restaurant. Demetrio sat in his rental car across the street, watching people come and go. At 1:45, Scott's Mercedes pulled into the lot. His son emerged wearing a navy suit that looked new, probably bought for the occasion. Tiffany followed, checking her reflection in the car window. They looked nervous. Scott kept adjusting his tie. At 1:50, a white SUV parked next to them. An older couple got out, the man tall and silver-haired, the woman petite with kind eyes, Stephen and Linda Richardson. They were holding hands. From the back seat, they helped a young woman in leg braces navigate out of the vehicle. Emma. She was laughing at something her father said, her whole face bright with joy. Demetrio's chest constricted. Linda Richardson looked up at the title company building, then out toward the ocean 2 blocks away. Even from across the street, Demetrio could see tears on her face. Happy tears. Scott saw them too. Demetrio watched his son's expression crumble for just a moment before he forced on a smile and walked over to shake Stephen Richardson's hand. At 1:58, Robert Walsh's Mercedes pulled up. The attorney got out, spotted Demetrio's car, and walked over. "You ready?" Walsh asked through the window. "No." "Good. That means you're thinking clearly." Walsh handed him a manila envelope. "I prepared 3 options. Read them fast. You have 2 minutes to decide which version of yourself you want to be." Demetrio opened the envelope. 3 documents, each with a tab. Option A, full enforcement, void the sale, evict Scott, criminal charges. Option B, full surrender, renew lease unconditionally, walk away. Option C, conditional renewal, complex terms typed on 3 pages. He scanned option C. His hands trembled. "This could work," he whispered. "It's not revenge and it's not mercy," Walsh said. "It's accountability. The question is, can you live with it?" Demetrio looked at the title company. Through the window, he could see Scott signing papers, see the Richardsons smiling. "Let's find out." The reception area fell silent when Demetrio walked in. Scott was mid-signature, pen frozen above a document. Tiffany's mouth opened. The Richardsons looked confused. The escrow officer, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain, stood up. "I'm sorry, sir, this is a private closing. Are you—" "Demetrio Thomas," he said. "I'm Scott's father, and I need to speak before anyone signs anything else." Scott's face went white. "Dad, what are you doing here?" "Stopping a fraud." The word landed like a grenade. Stephen Richardson's attorney, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, immediately stood. "Excuse me? Mr. Thomas, if you're contesting this sale, you need to file proper legal—" "I'm not contesting anything," Demetrio set his briefcase on the table. "I'm clarifying ownership. Scott, when did the ground lease expire?" All color drained from his son's face. "What ground lease?" Demetrio pulled out the documents, handed them to the escrow officer. "In 2012, when I transferred this property to my son for estate planning, my attorney structured it as a split ownership. Scott received the improvements, the house itself. I retained the land through an LLC. Scott leased the ground from me for $1 per year with a 10-year term." The escrow officer's hands shook as she read. "This says, the lease expired March 15th, 2022. 2 years ago," Demetrio confirmed. Walsh stepped forward, addressing the room. "Under California Civil Code Section 1951 and the specific reversion clause in this ground lease, when a lease expires without renewal, all improvements on the land revert to the landowner. Mr. Scott Thomas has been operating under the mistaken belief that he owns this property. He does not. His father does." The Richardson attorney snatched the documents, read them. Her face went from skeptical to horrified in 30 seconds. "This can't be right," she said. "We did title search. We have title insurance. The deed is clean." "The deed to the structure is clean," Walsh said, "but the structure sits on land your client doesn't own and can't convey. The title company checked the grantee index for Scott Thomas. They didn't cross-reference the underlying land parcel against LLC ownership. It's an obscure structure, rarely used in residential real estate, but it's legal, and it's enforceable." Linda Richardson grabbed her husband's arm. "Stephen, what does this mean?" Stephen's jaw clenched. He looked at Scott. "It means you're selling us a house you don't own." "I didn't know." Scott shot to his feet. "Dad, I swear to God I didn't know about any ground lease. You never told me." "I did tell you," Demetrio said quietly. 12 years ago in the lawyer's office. You didn't pay attention because your mother was dying and you trusted me to handle the details. I trusted you to never sell. We both made assumptions." Tiffany stood, her voice shaking. "This is insane." You're sabotaging the sale after we've already... She stopped, realizing what she was about to admit. After you've already spent the money, Demetrio finished. The deposit cleared yesterday, I know. You paid off $2 million to creditors. You wired another $100,000 to your landlord. You bought plane tickets to Cabo. He looked at his son. Did you really think I wouldn't investigate why my own child would throw me away? Scott sank back into his chair. He looked like he might vomit. The Richardson attorney began gathering papers. Mr. and Mrs. Richardson, we're withdrawing from this transaction immediately. This title is fatally defective. We cannot proceed. Wait, Demetrio said. Everyone froze. Mr. and Mrs. Richardson, Demetrio turned to the couple, you sold your business. You planned this for 5 years. You chose this house for Emma. Linda's eyes filled with tears. We did. But we can't be part of this. We won't profit from what your son did to you. Emma, sitting quietly until now, spoke up. Her voice was soft but clear. Mom, can I say something? Linda touched her daughter's hand. Of course, honey. Emma looked at Demetrio. Mr. Thomas, I'm sorry this happened to you, but I've been dreaming about living by the ocean my whole life. My parents worked so hard. I don't want them to lose this because of someone else's mistake. She paused. But I also don't want them to do something wrong. So, I guess we'll find another house. The simple grace of it, this young woman in leg braces comforting him, broke something open in Demetrio's chest. He looked at Kathleen's wedding photo, which he'd brought with him, sitting on the edge of the table. Her smile seemed to say, be the kind of man who builds. You won't need to find another house, Demetrio said. Scott's head snapped up. Dad, Demetrio held up a hand. But we're going to do this differently. Robert, give them option C. And Walsh pulled out the document, handed it to the Richardson attorney. What is this? Stephen asked. A conditional ground lease renewal, Demetrio said. I will renew the lease to Scott, which validates his ability to sell to you. The sale can proceed. You get the house, but Scott's ownership comes with terms. He turned to his son. Scott, you will sell this house to the Richardsons, but of the $9.5 million, you will pay me $2 million immediately. That money goes into a trust, not for me, for your future. You can't touch it for 10 years. It's insurance against you making these mistakes again. Scott opened his mouth, closed it. The remaining $7.5 million is yours. It should be enough to clear your debts and give you a fresh start. But, Demetrio's voice hardened, you will also sign a promissory note for the emotional damages you've caused. Not money. Accountability. What kind of accountability? Tiffany whispered. Demetrio pulled out a single sheet of paper, handed it to Scott. You're going to read this, out loud, right now, in front of everyone in this room. It's an apology, a real one. And the Richardsons, the escrow officer, and your wife are going to witness it, because you don't get to slink away from this pretending it never happened. Scott took the paper. His hands shook so badly he could barely hold it. I can't. You can. Or the sale dies right here, and you face fraud charges when the Richardsons sue you for their deposit. Your choice. The room went silent. Scott looked at Tiffany. She was crying silently, mascara running down her face. She nodded. He looked at the Richardsons. Linda's expression was impossible to read. Stephen just watched, stone-faced. Scott looked at his father. I'm sorry, he whispered. Not to me, to everyone. Read it. Scott stood on shaking legs, cleared his throat, started reading. To my father, Demetrio Thomas, I betrayed the man who gave me everything. I chose money over the person who chose me every single day of my life. I kicked you out of the home you built with Mom, and I did it because I was a coward. I was too ashamed to ask for help, too proud to admit I'd failed. So I took the coward's way. I hurt you in secret, then told everyone you were losing your mind so they'd believe me instead of you. Scott's voice cracked. He paused, breathing hard. Mom would be ashamed of me. I'm ashamed of me. I looked at my debts and my failures, and instead of facing them, I decided you were the problem. I decided you were dispensable. I decided that your 40 years of work, of love, of sacrifice meant less than my need to look successful. I'm accepting your terms, not because I deserve mercy, but because you're showing me more love right now than I showed you in the last 6 months. I will spend the next 10 years proving I can be the man you raised me to be, the man Mom believed I could be. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. He lowered the paper. Tears streamed down his face. Tiffany was sobbing into her hands. The escrow officer dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Linda Richardson was crying openly. Even Stephen looked shaken. Emma wheeled herself closer to Scott. That took courage, she said quietly. Reading that. Scott looked at her, broken. I don't feel courageous. You will, she said. Someday. Demetrio felt his own eyes burning. He hadn't expected this to hurt so much. Not the anger, but the grief. The grief of watching his son crack open and bleed in front of strangers because it was the only way to save him. Sign the renewal, Scott, Demetrio said. His voice was rough. Sign it and finish the sale. The Richardsons deserve their home. Scott signed. His signature was a shaking scrawl. Walsh notarized it. The escrow officer updated the title documents. The Richardson attorney reviewed everything 3 times before nodding to her clients. It's legitimate now, she said. If you still want to proceed. Stephen Richardson looked at his wife. She looked at Emma. Emma smiled. We'll proceed, Stephen said. But Mr. Thomas, Demetrio, if you ever need anything at all, you have our number. Take care of the garden, Demetrio said. My wife planted it. She'd want it loved. Linda touched his arm. We'll love it, I promise. The signing took another hour. Scott could barely hold the pen. Tiffany sat in the corner, silent and hollow-eyed. The Richardsons were subdued, their joy dimmed by the trauma they'd witnessed. When it was done, when the papers were signed and the wire transfers confirmed, Scott approached his father in the parking lot. Dad, Not now, Demetrio said. He was exhausted, hollowed out. You need to sit with this, really sit with it. We'll talk, eventually, but not today. When? When you're ready to hear me. Right now you're still just sorry you got caught. Scott flinched like he'd been slapped. Demetrio got in his car and drove away. 6 months later. The Santa Monica condo wasn't Malibu. It was smaller. 2 bedrooms, 10th floor. Ocean view partially blocked by the building next door. But it was his. Bought with the $2 million Scott had paid him, invested carefully, generating enough income to live comfortably. Every Sunday morning at 8 a.m., Scott knocked on the door. It had taken him 3 months to work up the courage to start visiting. The first time, he'd stood in the hallway for 20 minutes before knocking. Demetrio had watched through the peephole, waiting to see if his son would run. He hadn't run. Now, 6 months in, they had a routine. Coffee on the balcony. Not much talking at first, just sitting, watching the joggers and the surfers and the endless Pacific. This Sunday, Scott brought something with him, a photo album wrapped in brown paper. I found this in storage, Scott said, unwrapping it. Pictures of you and Mom building the Malibu house, 1985. They flipped through it together, Kathleen in overalls, painting a wall, Demetrio installing a window frame, both of them young and sunburned and laughing. I drive by sometimes, Scott said quietly. The house. The Richardsons put Mom's garden back. They added a ramp for Emma, but they kept the roses. Good. Emma waves at me when she sees me, like she knows. Demetrio sipped his coffee. She probably does. I'm in therapy, Scott said abruptly. Real therapy, not court-ordered. I asked for it. How's it going? Terrible. I hate it, but I keep going. Scott set down his mug. The therapist asked me last week what I'd say to you if I knew you'd really hear me. Not just listen, but hear. What did you tell her? That I'd say, I spent my whole childhood watching you be successful. You made it look easy. The business, the money, the respect. I wanted that so badly. And when I couldn't get it on my own, when I kept failing, I started resenting you for making it look effortless. Demetrio turned to look at his son. Scott was staring at his hands. I never told you how hard it was, Demetrio said. The failures before the success, the nights I couldn't sleep because of deals that went bad. I wanted you to believe I was strong. I wanted to be the kind of father you could admire. I did admire you, I do. That's why what I did was so... Scott's voice broke. How do you forgive something like what I did? Demetrio thought about it, looked out at the ocean. I don't know if I've forgiven it, he said honestly. But I chose not to destroy you for it. That's not the same thing. Forgiveness is... It's a process. Some days I'm angrier than others. Some days I miss the house so much I can't breathe. But you keep showing up. That matters. Does it matter enough? Ask me in a year. They sat in silence. A seagull landed on the balcony railing, cocked its head at them, flew away. Scott's phone buzzed. He checked it. Tiffany says, don't forget dinner with her parents tonight. How is she? Better. She got a job at a marketing firm. Real salary, real hours. She deleted Instagram. Says it was like quitting an addiction. Scott smiled faintly. We're trying to build something actual, not just something that looks good in photos. That's good, Scott. We're also, Scott hesitated. We're pregnant, 3 months. We didn't want to tell anyone until we were sure, but Demetrio's breath caught. A baby? Yeah. Scott's eyes filled. I'm terrified I'm going to screw it up, that I'm going to be the kind of father who... You won't be. How do you know? Because you're terrified. The ones who screw it up are the ones who think they have all the answers. Demetrio reached over and gripped his son's shoulder. You'll make mistakes, but you'll show up. That's what matters. Scott covered his father's hand with his own. They stayed like that for a long moment. Congratulations, son, Demetrio said. It was the first time in 6 months he'd called him that. Scott heard it, broke down. Demetrio held him while he cried. This 42-year-old man who'd betrayed him, this boy who'd lost his way, this father-to-be who was trying to find it again. When Scott finally pulled away, wiping his eyes, he laughed shakily. Jesus, I'm a mess. We're all a mess. Scott stood to leave, paused at the door. Next Sunday? Next Sunday. After he left, Demetrio sat on the balcony with Kathleen's photo, the one he'd rescued from the trash 6 months ago. What do you think, Katie? He whispered. Did I do the right thing? The photo didn't answer, but the morning sun broke through the clouds, lighting up the ocean gold. Somewhere in Malibu, the Richardsons were probably having breakfast on his old deck. Emma was probably watching the waves. The garden Kathleen had planted was blooming. Somewhere in Santa Monica, Scott was driving to work, probably still crying, probably terrified about being a father, but showing up anyway. And here, in this smaller life, this quieter life, Demetrio sat with his ghosts and his grief, and something that felt almost like peace. The phoenix hadn't burned the world down. It had simply risen.